Wanderers, the lunging strike this season is the strongest, fastest, and one of the most fun barbarian build out there. It can fly through speed farming, delete bosses, and has pushed Pit 106 already. I have had an insane time on this barbarian, and I'm about to do a complete breakdown of the build, followed by a live Q&A. This video is going to be a bit longer, so make sure you use the timestamps that are in the description of this video if you want to get to just the breakdown of the guide. I'm going to have the timestamps put at each section: skills, Paragon Board, gear. I'll talk about those first, and then we'll get into the more detailed section of it. So if you do want to skip to the most important parts of the build itself, just use those timestamps and we'll get there. So the very first thing that we're going to start with is we're going to start with the skills. So at the top here, we're going to be starting with Lunging Strike. Lunging Strike is going to be where all of your damage is going to come from with this build. So we're going to max that out. We're going to be going down all the way through Battle Lunging Strike. This is going to give us bleed. That bleed is going to play a very, very big part in this build, and we'll talk about that when we get to the gear section or at the very end of this skill breakdown here. 1 point into Pressure Point. This is going to be an overpowered build, so we're going to be maxing out Warpath. This is going to give us additional damage after we overpower. We are going to need as much Fury as we possibly can for this build, so we're going to be maxing out all of our Tempered Fury here. This is going to give us some additional maximum Fury. We need to generate as much Fury as we can, even though it is a basic skill build. Our basic skills are going to cost Fury, and we're going to increase that Fury cost. So we need to generate a lot of skill. That's why we're taking Endless Fury here. We're going to be using Ground Stomp to generate Fury, which is still going to be important for this build. And it's also going to reset the cooldown of our ultimate. So this is going to allow us to reset up to 15 seconds if we hit 3 enemies. We're going to max out Imposing Presence for some additional maximum life. We're going to be putting 3 points into Martial Vigor for some damage reduction against elites. We're going to take a Rallying Cry all the way down through Strategic Rallying Cry. This is how we're going to get some of our Fortify generation here. Because we're going to be running a basic skill build, we're going to be taking Belligerence. This is going to give us some additional damage after we use a basic skill. Our only ability that we attack with is a basic skill, so we're going to have this up all the time. Challenging Shout is going to give us some more maximum HP. It's also going to give us some damage reduction. Warcry all the way down through Power Warcry. Whenever we have 6 or more enemies around us, we're going to deal 10% additional damage to Warcry's damage, which is already at 15% increased damage. We're also going to gain Berserking here. Now, with the way that this build is set up, we're going to have Berserking up all of the time, and you're going to have your cooldowns up all the time. It's actually a very, very fun build to play because of how fast your cooldowns come up. Booming Voice, we're going to put 3 points here. This will extend the duration of your shouts. Then we're going to be going into Aggressive Resistance. This is going to give some damage reduction while we're berserking, and we will be berserking all the time. Pit Fighter is going to give us some damage reduction as well as some damage to close enemies. We're going to be going into Slaying Strikes. This is going to give us some damage versus healthy and injured enemies. Healthy enemy is anything that is going to be above 80% life, and then an injured enemy is going to be anything below 35% life. We do want to run 100% critical strike chance, so we're going to take No Mercy. If you do have enough critical strike chance in your gear to remove this points, you can do that. You can actually to remove that and put that into something like Defensive Stance here if you want to. That's going to give you some more defenses because you don't need to really worry about the critical strike chance. 1 point into Thick Skin to unlock Counteroffensive. We're going to put 3 points here. Whenever our Fortify is over 50% of our maximum life, we're going to deal damage. And we'll show you what Fortify is when we get into the gameplay section. 3 points into Duelist. This is going to give us increased attack speed with a one-handed weapon. We're going to be running a dual wield setup for this build, so we want as much attack speed as we possibly can. We're going to be maxing out Invigorating Fury. I love this ability. Whenever we spend Fury, which we're going to spend a lot of Fury with this build, we're going to generate more maximum life. This is going to give us 9% as a heal. We're going to be taking Wrath of Berserker here. This got changed this season. It is so good. It has a pull, so we don't have to run any other mechanic to pull monsters to us. It's also going to give us a Berserking and Unstoppable for 10 whole seconds. That is an incredibly long time, and we'll be able to chain Wrath of Berserker cooldown so that we don't have to worry about this falling off ever. We're going to be going into Prime Wrath of Berserker here. This is going to give us more Fury generation and movement speed, and then we're also going to be taking Supreme Wrath of Berserker. This is going to increase the amount of damage that we do every time that we spend 50 Fury. That can go up to 100% increase, and that is the Berserking bonus. And if you look right down here, it says Berserking grants 25% increased damage and 15% movement speed. That bonus will now be 100% instead of that 25%. So it doesn't take an additional 100% damage. It actually just takes your Berserking damage and takes it from 25 up to 100%. And for your key passive, we're going to be going into Unconstrained. Your Berserking damage bonus now is always going to be 60%. Well below 65% life, you're always going to be Berserking, and you're going to gain 30% increased physical damage reduction. Now, the interesting thing about this here is, well, we're running this, and we're running Wrath of the Berserker. These don't stack, so we're going to have to see what adjustments get made next season, because our Berserking bonus is always going to be up to 100%, and then not that 60%. So we have 1 point left. Now, this is where it's going to be up to you for your build. You guys can choose what you want to run. I had the point into Raid Leader here. That's going to be a heal. If you're feeling a little squishy, you can actually put that into Guttural Yell. That's some extra damage reduction. Or you can go down into Defensive Stance. That's going to be a heal and some damage reduction, but it's going to be half of both of those. So it's up to you where you want to put that last skill point. You can even put it into Warcry if you wanted to get some more damage because you're feeling great. It's going to be completely up to you where you want to go. The next thing we're going to hop into is going to be your Paragon board. For the starter board here, and when you're leveling up your Paragon board, now in this video, I'm going to have my Lunging Strike build planner in the description of this video, and it is incredibly important. I spent a lot of time today making it look pretty much exactly like it does inside the video. I put all of the stats on my gear. How your planners are going to work: you have Legendary, you have a Unique section, you have a Mythic section. As you go through the planner, if you have a piece from this Mythic section, it is going to be a really easy swap to just put it on. So I've made it just a couple changes that you're going to have to do depending on what section and what gear you have. So move your stuff around for whatever variant you're playing. If you go into gear stats here, you can actually see all of the stats that you need, where to put the masterworking crits. And if you don't want to know what masterworking crits are, check the description of the video as well for a how-to on masterworking. It is an incredibly important part of the endgame builds. It is going to show you your runes, your gems. It has a rotation here. It also has a Fury management section, which is definitely going to be an issue as you move on into these Lucian variants. Now, Lucian is going to be the best way to go, but we're going to get to that when we get into the gear. So make sure you follow along with Planner. It's incredibly important. You don't have to pause the video, put in all your Paragon points, then move to the next slide. You can just follow along in the planner with the Paragon board. Now, for this right here, the first starter board, we're going to be running Challenger. Now, a question that I get asked a lot: how much damage do you get from having your glyphs at level 46 versus 100? And the answer is absolutely double the amount of damage that you would have had if you only took your glyphs to level 46. So once you hit level 46 on each of your glyphs, then you want to progress to level 100 as best you can. Now, it's a progression. It is not something that you can just rush to get done. It's going to be a journey that you're going to have to take your glyphs on, but leveling them up does have a benefit. So in the starter board, we're going to be running Challenger. Challenger is going to increase all of your normal nodes. You can see all of these here have basically doubled. So that's going to give you a whole lot more strength. It's going to give you a lot more critical strike chance. So having Challenger here is a really great option for you. It's also going to give you some damage to elites and then some additional multipliers to elites with a legendary power. Next board, we're going to be running Warbringer. After you spend Fury, which we'll talk about Fury spending because it's going to be a lot, you're going to also fortify yourself. So we want to have as many sorts of fortify as we can. Fortify gives you 15% reduced damage, so having any damage reduction is incredibly important. Now, I have a whole video on how to build a Paragon board effectively, so you can check that out as well. Inside of this board, we're going to be running Wrath. Now, we talked about how quickly we're going to be spending Fury, and I'll show you at the very end of the video when we get into the gameplay loop how quickly we're actually going to spend that Fury. Every time that we have a critical hit, we're going to generate 3 Fury. That 3 Fury is also going to be run through any Fury generation that we have and then increased. So let's say that we can get up to 100% increased Fury generation. Now, instead of generating 3, it's going to generate 6 Fury per hit. And we hit very fast, and we hit a lot of monsters, which is incredibly important because we really do need all the Fury generation we can. In the next board, we're going to be running Blood Rage. This has changed. In this season now, you do not have to have damage while berserking bonus. All you have to do is just pick the legendary node, and now you have 45% increased damage while you're berserking. We've talked about all the different ways in the skill tree that you will be berserking. So the killing a bleeding enemy has a 10% chance to grant berserking for 5 seconds is basically useless. We will have bleed, so that will take effect, but we won't really need it with the way the build is set up. In this board, we're going to be running Ambidextrous. Ambidextrous is going to increase your magic nodes. So if you look right here, we actually have increased magic nodes. And the reason that this is incredibly important here, before you add in all of the gear that has all stats like the Grandfather or Tybalt's Will, you won't have enough points to unlock these. So if you are able to add in things like your willpower here or your dexterity here, that is going to give you the ability to unlock all of your rare nodes further along in the Paragon boards. Now, the way the Paragon boards work, the further from the start board you have, the more expensive the rare nodes are. So with this board here, we're also going to be running 8% increased damage while wielding a one-handed weapon, and you gain some increased damage as well for the legendary power. For the next board, we're going to be running Decimator. You're going to deal 20% increased damage to vulnerable enemies. We have some very fun ways to make enemies vulnerable, and we'll talk about 2 different ways that we're going to be using the runes to do that. You're also going to deal 20% increased overpowered damage. Now, that overpowered damage is still beneficial, even though overpower got nerfed. The only thing that it really got nerfed down to was just now an extra multiplier. Still, anywhere you can add extra multipliers, you're still going to hit a lot harder. Inside of this board here, we're going to be running Marshal. Marshal is going to help reset the cooldown of our Wrath of Berserker, as well as our Ground Stomp, because Ground Stomp is going to help also reset Wrath of Berserker. The more that we can get that off of cooldown, the more we can pull enemies in. You really don't have to cast it more than once every 10 seconds because you're going to have that bonus no matter what. But pulling those enemies in is actually a really big increase to your offenses, because when everything is on top of you, you can hit all the monsters, things die a lot faster, you can push the pits a lot faster. In the final board, we're going to be running Weapon Master. Now, this one I get a lot of questions about. Swapping weapons is going to grant 8% maximum fury. That's it. When you're looking at how Blizzard words things, this says swapping weapons grants 8% maximum fury, period. That is one part of the glyph. That is one part of the legendary node. You deal 30% increased damage to injured and healthy enemies. That is a completely separate part of how they word it. So that means that no matter what, when Weapon Master is on, we are going to deal that increased damage to injured and healthy enemies. So taking this, you can ignore the part where we're swapping weapons because we don't swap weapons, we just use one ability. And then inside of this board here, we're going to be running Revenge. Now, Revenge is put here for a very specific reason. Revenge is going to grant a bonus to all of your rare nodes, not your magic nodes. That's going to be this one here. You're going to get 25% maximum fury just by adding Revenge into this board, and that is an incredibly important part of this build. That's why we want to make sure we have enough willpower, as we talked about in the earlier boards where we were increasing the magic nodes. So where you place your glyphs really does matter. It's very important to think about your entire board, why you're going to put your glyphs where they are. Revenge is a unique glyph because it's going to give you 2 different damage multipliers. A lot of the glyphs will not give you 2, so anywhere you can fit in 2 damage multipliers is amazing. Dealing Thorns damage is going to deal increased damage, and you're also going to gain a damage multiplier in the bottom here. So there's going to be 2 different ways that you can run this right here. Depending on the version you're running, this extra point here, you're going to put this extra point into Outburst. That's going to give you that extra points there. Or if you go into the planner here, and then you're looking through with the legendary version here, you can actually add Outburst into one of your tempers here, and then that will allow you to have those thorns. So you're going to figure out which way you want to put the points in, if you want to run it here. If you're running a different version of this and you have the Shroud of False Death, or you don't have a Rage of Haragoth, then you're automatically going to get those skill points. But you want to have at least 1 point into Outburst, so make sure you figure out what's going to work best for your build. Okay, so let's start pulling this whole entire build together. We're going to be talking about the gear. Now, this is going to be the most difficult version of the Lunding Strike build to run, and that's all going to be focused around the Crown of Lucian. The Crown of Lucian is going to give us a 75% increased multiplier. This is going to be the strongest helmet out of all of them. The Ugly Bastard helmet, unfortunately, is broken. Air of Perdition only gives you a 60x multiplier, and adding in Harlequin's Crest, the amount of damage that you're going to gain from the ranks, plus you already have this massive pool of max resources, adding in the little bit of max resources that you're going to get is actually not going to make as much difference as adding a completely separate multiplier that you do not have already with the Crown of Lucian. So the Crown of Lucian take all of that extra damage and is going to add a completely different multiplier. That's why we run the Crown of Lucian, and it is really the best way to go. Now, if you're looking for where to put all your masterwork and crits, because my gear is not perfect yet, you want to come back to the gear and you want to look and see Crown of Lucian. We want a triple hit lucky hit. Now we'll talk about why we want a triple hit lucky hit in just a second. But the Crown of Lucian, it gives us some cooldown reduction, lucky hit chance, and then a really big 75% increase multiplier. Now the reason we want to run lucky hit is because we're going to be running the Rage of Haragoth. Now my aspect here isn't perfect. That is the most important part of this piece of gear. You want to have an aspect as close to level 60 as you can, even if that means sacrificing some GAs. Sacrificing the GAs to get that 60% makes this build work. And the reason that we do that, if you look at Lunging Strike here, Lunging Strike has a 66% chance to lucky hit on this build here. Now, I don't have a GA on Lucian, and I didn't treble Masterwork it at all. So this can go up. What a lucky hit chance means is that when I hit, I have a 66% chance to proc a lucky hit. When I proc that lucky hit, I now have a 54% on that lucky hit chance to reduce the cooldowns that I have by 1 second. So having 100% lucky hit doesn't actually mean that you have 100% lucky hit, which is kind of confusing. But we'll pull up the lucky hit chance here. And if you see, my lucky hit chance bonus is actually only 31%. So the best way to describe this is if I had Lunging Strike at 25% lucky hit chance, and I added in, let's say, my Fists of Fate, and my lucky hit chance bonus down at the bottom here went to 100%. I now have 100% lucky hit chance here. My Lunging Strike lucky hit chance was 25%. Now I have 50% lucky hit chance on Lunging Strike. If you multiply 25% times 100%, you're going to get that 50% increase. So that's really how this is going to work. It is not the most intuitive system, but you want to get your Lunging Strike as close to 100% lucky hit chance as you can. So that means that every single time that you land a lucky hit, you now have a 60% chance to reset your cooldowns. This is how we're going to generate all of the cooldowns so that you can keep all of your buffs up 100% of the time. That's also why it was really important in the skill tree that we went into battle Lunging Strike. This is now going to apply bleed every single time that we use Lunging Strike. And we're going to talk about a way that we're going to actually have an area of effect with Lunging Strike also. Now, all of those hits are going to apply bleed. They all have a 66% chance to proc a lucky hit. Then we have a chance to reset our cooldown, and your cooldowns, especially in big packs of monsters, fly down almost instantly. So that's going to be really important, and that's why we're running the Rage of Haragoth over the Shroud of False Death. You cannot get the same cooldown reduction that you get with the Shroud of False Death. For the gloves, we're going to be running Pain Gorgers. These got a huge buff, and they are incredibly strong now. They can now overpower, and they can now crit. They used to not be able to do that. It was just normal white damage. They weren't very, very strong, but now that they've added this on, it makes the build 100%. The aspect is definitely going to be the most important part of this. And then you can look at the planner to see which GAs you want the most, because I put in the most important ones in there. But how this works, damaging an enemy with a non-basic skill is going to cast a mark on them for 3 seconds. When a basic skill first hits a marked enemy, the basic skill's damage is echoed to all of the marked enemies. So how you have to get this to work is you have to do a damage with anything other than Lunging Strike. Now we're going to deal damage 2 different ways. We're going to deal damage with Wrath of Berserker or our runes, and we'll talk about runes. Depending on your rune choice, you may only have Wrath of Berserker and Ground Stomp, but those are definitely going to be enough. So we'll cover your rune options in just a little bit. For the pants, we're going to be running to Bolt's Will. You're going to deal 20% increased damage while you're unstoppable. We saw how long Wrath of Berserker is going to make us unstoppable for, so we will be unstoppable all the time with this build. Plus, it gives us maximum resources, and we keep on talking about maximum resources, and we're going to get there really, really soon as to why it's so important. For the boots, these are brand new, and these are amazing. Casting a basic skill while at maximum fury is going to cause your fury to increasingly drain until you run out, which your basic skill now will cleave and deal 100% increased damage. So how this works, when you get up to maximum fury, which with this here, if you look, we're gaining fury per second. I'm actually currently sitting right here, maximum fury. You can see the drain and you can see the increase. When we get to maximum fury and I use a basic skill, my fury will rapidly start to drain, but I will start cleaving. This is how your Lunging Strike will now hit multiple enemies and you have an area of effect. It's not just within that little radius. Then when you use Wrath of Berserker, you're going to put Pain Gorgers on every single one of those enemies that get pulled in. And now we have put Pain Gorgers, that is going to echo all of that damage. Plus you have your Cleave, which is echoing all of the damage. It's really, really cool to watch things just kind of blow up. So for the bludgeoning weapon, we're going to be running Moonrise. Damaging an enemy with a basic skill is going to grant 4% increased attack speed for 10 seconds. So we're now stacking attack speed. That can stack up to 5 times. When you reach maximum stack, you're going to enter a Vampiric Blood Rage. You're going to gain 120% increased basic skill damage and movement speed for 10 seconds. We attack so fast that when this falls off, it's immediately all the way right back up. So we enter that Vampiric Blood Rage right again. This is straight out of the season of the vampires in season 2. Amazing season. These powers are so much fun. For the affixes here, we're going to be running Strength, Max Life, and then we're actually going to be running Lucky Hit Chance to restore primary resources, and that's done on purpose. You can fill up your Fury bar right away. If this procs, it's only 15% chance on a lucky hit. But from 1 all the way up to, we're going to be running upwards of 400 maximum Fury, it will fill it. That's really great when your Fury is draining incredibly fast and you don't want it to get back down to 0 because then you lose that extra damage bonus. So this is going to help. For the tempers here, we're going to be running Critical Strike damage and then chance for Lunging Strike to deal double damage. The fun part about this is that my Masterworking is absolutely terrible on this weapon, and you don't need any Masterworking crits in chance for Lunging Strike to deal double damage, so make sure you follow along with the planner. That will be much more comprehensive than what my gear is at. For the first weapon, we're going to be running the Ramaladi's Magnum Opus and the Ramalama Ding Dong. This weapon is the first step in why we want so much maximum resource, and that 0.5% is the most important part of this weapon. That is going to take 0.5% of our maximum Fury, and it's going to increase our damage per point of Fury. Now, if we look right here, I'm at 368. I am not buffed at all. So when I get fully buffed, I'm going to be at 400 maximum Fury. So we take half of that, a 200 increase to my damage. It's a whole lot of damage. That's why the Magnum Opus is so strong for this build, especially when you pair that with the Shard of Varathio. That gives you, your basic skills are going to increase by 150%. You pair your 150% with your 200% from your maximum Fury, and you have a huge combination. The downside to this, though, is that you're going to actually have a cost to your basic skills now. It's going to cost primary resources, it's going to cost 25. When you're running your Crown of Lucian, each time you cast a skill, you're going to increase your resource costs by 30% per hit up to 5 times. You're going to make your basic skill cost 125 Fury. That is a whole lot, and that is why it's been so important that we have so much Fury generation here. So for the Shard here, that's why we want to run maximum resources, but this is incredibly important, and the amount of damage that you do, if you have 50% on this aspect versus 150 is night and day. So even if you need to run the wrong GA, run 150% or as close to it as you can. For your slashing weapon, we're going to be running the Grandfather, the Granddaddy of Swords here. This is going to increase your critical strike damage by 100% X. It also is going to be just a huge source of everything that you need. Maximum resources, all stats, and maximum life. The damage on it is okay. It's just a bunch of additive damage, so the damage isn't really the most important thing. The maximum resources is. But then we're going to be running the Ring of Starless Sky for your first. This is incredibly helpful because we said that your basic skill is now going to cost 125 Fury. Fortunately, with the Ring of Starless Sky, it cuts that in half. So now we won't be spending as much, and it will actually help a ton with your Fury management. Now, again, if you need to look at it, I have a Fury management section inside of the planner, depending on where you're at with your gear. So make sure you review that, because this build definitely can be very challenging to run with the Crown of Lucian, especially without the Ring of Starless Sky. This also has Lucky Hit Chance, which we talked about, super important. I don't have a GA there. And it has a huge increase to critical strike chance. That's how we're going to get our stats up to 100% critical strike chance, which is, of course, the goal, no matter what build you're playing. But we want to have that as close to that 100% as you can. For the other ring, we're going to be running Earthquakes. Now, I know Earthquakes got nerfed this season. We're not using it for the damage. We're just using it for that big buff. Whenever you use Ground Stomp, and that is going to be your source of Earthquakes. And that's why it's so important that Ground Stomp comes off of cooldown so quickly, because we need that in order to gain the extra damage bonus. We're going to increase our damage while standing in an Earthquake and for 4 seconds after you leave that. So that's really important. You drop your Earthquake, you stand in it, stand in it, stand in it, And then if you leave it, even after you leave it for 4 seconds, you're going to gain increased damage. So that damage is incredibly important. The bottom part of this aspect where your Earthquake deals additional damage really doesn't matter too much. For your affixes here, we're going to be running Strength, Attack Speed, Critical Strike Chance. And for your Tempers, we're going to be running Resource Generation with a dual wield weapon. And then we're going to be running Critical Strike Damage. For the Amulet here, this is the absolute 100% strongest aspect for a basic skill build out there right now. Adaptability got a huge buff. What this does, it is going to make your basic skills generate additional resources, which is incredibly important because they're going to cost resources now with Shard of Wrathiel. They will be generating and they will also be costing at the same time, so you want to try and get that balance just right. Your basic skills are going to deal up to 0.9% increased damage per point of primary resources you have. If we have 400 primary resources, we are dealing almost 400% increased damage. It is absolutely massive. So there's no way that you can replace adaptability for any basic skill build on your amulet whatsoever. You're going to lose way too much damage if you try and put anything else here. So this is the number one. For your affixes here, we're going to be running Strength, Counteroffensive, Pit Fighter. And I do have one of my resistances here for my Tempers. I put Poison Resistance on here. Now, resistances we'll talk about a little bit because it's very difficult to hit your resistances this season. With all the uniques that you still need to run to make the builds work, you will be a little bit short on one resistance for this build. So we'll talk about a couple different ways if you want to make sure that you're there and you don't quite have the gear yet or the maximum life to sustain the damage that you're taking, which with this build right now, with the way it's set up, I do. So you'll be able to mess around with your Tempers and your affixes as well, depending on where your gear is at and where your character's at. Now remember, these are just guides. You can change things, you can modify things. If it doesn't work for you, then change something to make it work for you. So for the jewels, we're actually going to pop over to Mobilytics here. This is going to allow me to read the names. You can't actually read the names in-game unless you take them out. We're going to be running Willbreaker. Physical damage you deal shatters enemy spirits, causing them to take 40% increased damage for 6 seconds. This is going to apply when you first damage a boss or elite, or when they're affected by crowd control. That also means the stagger phase for the bosses. Then we're going to be running a Myriad Stone. After casting your Catalyst skill, if it's an ultimate, you're going to gain 30% increased attack speed. We're going to have our ultimate attached to our new Horadric Spell, so you're going to get that 30% increased damage. We'll talk about the Horadric Spells in just a couple minutes. And then we're going to be running Idol from below. This is going to increase your primary stats by 6% and your maximum life by 6%. It's also going to allow you to spawn Jewel Guardians, which with this build is actually a really good thing when you're pushing the pits. If you spawn these Jewel Guardians, it's more monsters to hit, which means more fury generation, more chances to reset your cooldowns. So having those guys up is actually really great. So I really enjoy when they spawn during the boss fight. Coming back into the game here, when you're putting in your runes, for anybody that has the expansion pack, please do not put your runes into your gear. They should always go into your weapons. And the reason for that, now we're increasing our primary stat with our Horadric jewels. Primary stat is a multiplier. Now you have additive damage and you have multiplicative damage. The additive damage is all of these numbers right here. Those numbers get squished together and then multiplied by all of our different multipliers. So having multipliers is incredibly important. And those are more important than adding in an additive damage like these are right here into your weapons. So when you're building your barbarians, and this goes for any class, wherever you can socket any of your runes into a weapon, if you're running a two-handed weapon on whatever class you are, put them there because that's going to be the best spot no matter what class you're playing. The barbarian definitely has it unique where we do have the two-handed weapons that we can use. So that's why we're going to put our runes into our weapons. For the first runes, now this is going to be able to change. You can kind of mess around with what you're going to be running. Kurke definitely is my favorite version, but it's not the strongest version. What this is going to do, it's going to allow you to spawn the wolves. The wolves will apply vulnerable damage. Anything that those wolves hit will actually apply the Pain Gorger's mark on them. That will allow you to hit enemies that could be on the other side of the room over here. If your wolf attacks this, you could be attacking something right in front of you, and it will actually echo that damage to the enemy that is in the corner of the room. So having the wolves on is actually really, really beneficial, especially if you're running content where you don't necessarily need the most amount of damage that you can get. So Kurke is probably my favorite. when I was pushing pits and I cleared 102 with this build, when I cleared the 102, I was actually running Thull. You're going to invoke the Sorcerer's Mystical Frost Nova. Now, that's going to freeze the enemies. It's going to make them vulnerable. And it will also give you a 15x multiplier on top of that. Now, it's hidden in there, but it actually gives you an increase to your damage. So having this on is going to give you a little bit more damage than having your Cur Cat on. But that is definitely an option. If you're looking to take this build and push to the highest level of the pit, I would highly recommend running Thull here. You can run whatever generator you wanted. I actually did run Cur Thull. This would make it proc every 3 seconds. If you want to and you have the gems, you can run something like Igni. You can run something like Ahu. There's a lot of different combinations in there for you to run, but having that on will give you that extra damage. The other runes, we're going to be running Mani Zan. We did a ton of testing between running Ahu and running Mani. Ahu is actually better for trash, but when you get to the boss, you have 20% of the boss's life where Ahu doesn't really do anything, and then it really isn't as effective as having Mani. So having Mani Zan overall is much better experience. Every single time that we cast 3 lunging strikes, we're going to proc Zan. Zan is going to give us a guaranteed critical strike overpower. You can overpower outside of that, but this is how we overpower so often. And we'll show you in the gameplay loop how you're going to overpower and how often it comes up, and then how to run the build here. Inside of your gear, we talked about main stats. You're going to be running your rubies. You want to make sure that you put strength gems here. Then you can put your topaz in here for some basic skill damage. If you did happen to have emeralds or something in there, it is a very, very, very small amount of additive damage. So whichever gems you want to put in there really are going to work, but this is the highest additive damage for this build. For your expertise, now the way that expertise works, and a little tip for anybody, this is a bonus tip for anybody that's watching this. If you want to level up your expertise really, really fast, go down to normal difficulty, put on Whirlwind, put on whatever weapon. It can be a blue weapon of the type that you want to level up. You put on multiple target dummies, and then you just Whirlwind in those dummies. You will level up from 1 to level 10 in about 20 seconds at most. It just level after level after level after level. You don't have to go out into the world. You don't have to do anything. You just go into the dummies super fast. We're always going to be running a two-handed axe expertise. This is basically the best one that's out there. This adds 10% increased damage to vulnerable enemies, no matter what happens. You don't have to have a two-handed axe on. You just have to equip this, make the enemies vulnerable, and you gain that 10% increased damage. For the mercenaries here, and we'll talk about resistances in just a second, we're going to be running Rahir. I'm getting 15% increased resistances from Rahir. Now, if we take this off here and we look, my resistances now, most of them are still over cap, except for my cold resistance. Now, a cold resistance is pretty hurting right now. So if I get touched by anything, I'm going to take a lot of damage. When you're in a party, what's great about being in a party is that there's a lot of other people that are going to be crowd controlling monsters, and they're going to be killing monsters as well. So you don't really have to worry quite so much about dying. But if you're going to be running something like a hardcore character, or you're going to be running solo, having Rahir on is going to be incredibly important. So you just put this back on here. Now, I did have counteroffensive here. It used to be cold resistance. So if you do feel squishy, you're going to take counteroffensive and you're going to swap that to whatever resistances that you're missing. And then we're going to fill them out with incense. But we're going to finish up the mercenaries first, and we'll talk about incense in a second. But this is going to allow you to swap around all of your resistances to hit that cap. Because if I re-rolled this, I would be cap on everything. For your opportunity here, we're going to be running Variana. This is going to give you some increased attack speed here. Whenever we cast Lunging Strike, that's going to be once every 22 seconds. Now, we talked about incense, so let's take a look at what we're going to be running for incense and elixirs. Depending on where your armor is at, you can pick and choose what you want to run. I am not quite there. A couple more Paragon points and get some more strength, something like that. If I had a GA on strength on my amulet, I actually would be a little bit closer, and I probably wouldn't even need to run Song of the Mountain. That's the first one we're going to talk about. That will give you your 300 armor. So now I am 100% perfectly min-max cap on my armor. We have 1,000. That gives you the maximum damage reduction for physical damage. Now, this only does physical damage, and you can only need 1,000. If you go over, that's okay. It's not going to give you any extra bonuses. If you go under, probably want to get closer to that cap. So now we're going to talk about your resistances. We're going to be running Soothing Spices. When we use this here, that's going to put everything over cap. And we have 50% on our cold. Now, I did clear 102, and all of the runs, I never died to any cold damage. This build is very tanky, especially when it gets up and running. Finally, we're going to be running Ancient Times. This is going to give us 100 strength. So now we're actually pretty far over. But if I did drop Song of the Mountain, I would be a little bit too far under. If you can get your armor to be up to 1,300, you can drop Song of the Mountain, and then you can add in that extra life. That extra life will make a huge difference. Life is an incredibly great damage modifier, and nobody really thinks of life as being damage reduction. But if something's going to hit you for 6,000 and you only have 10,000 life, you now have 4,000 life left and you're scrambling and you're scared. But with a barbarian, with all of the buffs up, if you have 30,000 life and you get hit for 6,000, you just pop a potion that nobody ever upgrades and you just move on. So life is definitely incredibly important when you're building a build. For the elixir, a couple different choices. We talked about life. If you're feeling squishy, add some life on. If not, you definitely want to be running the elixir of resourcefulness. We already talked about your Ring of Starless Sky reducing your resource cost by 50%. Now, on top of that, we're going to add 20% additionally and 25 to our maximum fury. So we put that on. We look, I have almost 400 maximum fury. Now, with some great masterworking, that number can go higher. And the higher it goes, definitely going to be the better. So definitely want to work on getting those masterworking crits correct. The final thing we're going to cover before we go into the gameplay loop is going to be your Horadric Spell. We're going to be running Disintegrate here. I just really like this because it drops down right on top of you, right where you're fighting. With the Barbarian, you want to pull all of the monsters in. With your Wrath of the Berserker, you pull the monsters in, it drops it right there. Now, the way that these work, this does not add shadow damage to your abilities. Whenever we use Nebulous, this is just going to make your Catalyst do shadow damage. The Horadric spells do not make you do any extra damage or change the damage type that you do. It just makes your Catalyst do that damage. The reason we're running Nebulous here is because it gives us 10% damage reduction. Enemies hit by this is going to deal 10% less damage for 7 seconds. Having any sort of damage reduction is incredibly important when you're pushing high levels of the pit. If you just want to throw on something like Smoldering Embers because you're running around Helltides and you want to drop some burning embers on the ground, you can do that. But for this build, if you want to push the pits, we're going to be running Nebulous. We're going to be running Retroactive Ooze. This thing is actually really, really awesome. It's going to give you 20% maximum resource generation. Now, the resource generation, if you go down to the very bottom here, we're going to be running your resource generation here, but that actually gets increased depending on the abilities that you start to use. As we bump up, our Fury generation keeps on going up. So then we are going to add 20% on top of that. So it's a really, really cool way to increase that Fury generation and get that going. Then we're going to be running your Bloody Charm. This is a good and a bad thing. This makes your pit runs feel amazing. You're feeling good. You're feeling really strong. You get to the boss and you're like, why did that take longer than the entire run took to get to the boss? And I still didn't kill the boss in time. This is going to execute enemies, non-boss enemies, with 20% life or less. That includes elites. It's actually going to be doubled if it's going to be a non-elite because we're using Disintegrate. So when a monster gets to 40% life, that's a lot. It will automatically get executed and just disappear. All of your elites will disappear at 20%. If you think about how much life you have in the high ends of the pits, that 20% is a lot and it's a huge time saver. So it allows people to get to the boss really, really quickly, but then you just sit there and attack because you have got there a lot faster than you normally would have because things are getting executed. It will allow people to get higher clears than they normally would have sometimes, but also sometimes you just kind of run into a brick wall because you're not quite there, but you were able to get to that timer done because of this ability. So you can mess around with it and try it and see if you like it. I really love it, but if you want to try something different, your options are out there. Then we're going to be running Fractured Core. I was a little hesitant to use this on the PTR because 5 seconds for high levels of the pit was really not a lot. They increase it to 8 seconds, and what it does is your Catalyst is going to deactivate damage-resistant aura monsters for 8 seconds. It went from 5 to 8. That made all the difference. You're going to take 15% more sacking damage for the same duration. It's still okay. You're still tanky enough with the way that the build is set up. But at 8 seconds, is more than enough time, especially with your Bloody Charm, to kill those damage reduction monsters. You get them down to 40% life, and they immediately disappear, and you don't have to worry about them anymore. 8 seconds was a really, really great change and made this a really, really viable core to play. So when you're testing a build, we're going to talk about the training dummies really, really quick. You want to put on boss dummies if you want to just see the biggest numbers you want to see. Normally, you do more damage to bosses with any build. We're going to put on multiple boss dummies so you can see all of the numbers all over the place. If you want to test your single target dummies, you just take this off. And then we're going to put on, they actually need to attack you because as you saw, we had the Revenge Glyph running. With the Revenge Glyph, they need to actually hit you to take the Thorns damage to get that extra damage. So we put on physical attack so we can see the absolute maximum damage that this build is going to be doing. When you start off this build, the first thing that you're going to do is just you're going to Lunging Strike. And then you're basically going to never let go of Lunging Strike. That is basically the rotation, but I'll show you what a lot of the buffs look like. So when we Lunging Strike in, and then we start attacking, all of those numbers that just went down, that's because we've started draining our Fury. You can see it's draining really quickly now. It hit every single one of our targets because we have your Hooves of the Mountain God on. So now as we Lunging Strike, it's going to cleave. As you can see here, we're hitting all of the targets. The reason we're hitting all the targets is because we have Pain Gorgers on. These circles above the training dummies' heads are from our wolves. We have to do anything that damages any enemies that is not a basic skill. We can use anything to do that damage. So having those little circles of our head is going to echo the damage that we're doing to this single dummy right in the beginning here. And now it hits all of the training dummies. If you look here, they all have damage. My range is not actually that far. If you put on anything else, so we'll put on Tall here, and I start using Lunging Strike, I don't actually hit the dummies in the back. You see, there's no damage over there. It's just the first 3. But when I put Cur Cat on, because the wolves are attacking everything, it is now echoing that Pain Gorgers to everything that's here. You can see there's no Pain Gorger buff because I'm not dealing any damage with anything other than a basic skill. If I was to use Ground Stomp, now it puts the Pain Gorger mark over. And if I use Wrath of Berserker, the same thing. Wrath of Berserker puts the Pain Gorger's mark over all of the dummies that Wrath of Berserker hits, because Wrath of Berserker does do damage as well. So your options are going to be to run Kurke, or you can put Thull on. So if we put Thull on here, if you look here, when this procs, because you can see it on the bottom, it doesn't actually proc Pain Gorgers. That's the only downside to running Thull. You won't get your Pain Gorgers proc from anything other than your Wrath of Berserker and then your Ground Stomp. So those are going to be the only way to spread Pain Gorgers. You don't have as much range to do as much AoE, but it will hit a lot harder with Thull, so that is a very important way to run it. When you're just going to be attacking, you're just going to spam all of your abilities here. You just keep them all up, and then you just start hitting for billions of damage. So this is just the way that the build runs. Keep all of your stuff. You can see how fast the cooldowns are because we're running the Rage of Haragoth as our chess piece. Just hitting everything resets the cooldowns so fast. So it's super fun to play. These buffs on the bar here, these are going to be your runes here. You can see how fast they proc just by hitting. You can see I did one attack. Lunging Strike is going to keep on generating for my Zan rune. For Wrath of Berserker, the chains above your head here, this is your Unstoppable. And then this is going to be your Berserking bonus buff here. So there's quite a lot with this build when you get things running that you want to look out for. But you saw how fast the cooldowns are. It doesn't really matter too much because you're going to always be unstoppable. You're going to always have Berserking up from Wrath of Berserker. All right, so we're going to do something brand new. We're going to open it up to the stream because we're recording this live. We're going to open it up to a QA on the build guide here. So if anybody has any questions about your Lunging Strike build, anything that I just went over in that guide that we were just recording, you guys can free to ask right now, and then we'll answer some of the questions here. Yeah, I just updated all of it tonight. So it's all, I updated the change log. You can see all the changes down here at the very bottom of the planner. So you can see which ones we changed around. All right, so anybody got any questions? I know there were a couple earlier on. So that's a great question. What happens if I don't have the expansion pack or the runes with this build? You just won't hit as hard. This build will still run without that. Everything else other than the runes are in the base part of the game. So it's going to feel a little bit different, but the build will still run and it'll still function. So if you do not have the expansion pack, you are free to still play this build. Just know that it just will not do quite as much damage as you see on the screen. For resistance issue, I think not using Tibalt's Will would be a good option. IMO, it's not. So this is actually a really big source of damage. You can swap out something to give yourself resistances if you're feeling squishy, but not only that, this is going to give you, now remember, we saw how much adaptability gives. This is going to give you almost 40x increased damage from adaptability, and it's also going to give you additional 20x increased damage from Ramalotni's. On top of that, it gives you additional 20x while you increase and while you're unstoppable. So we're now looking at like 80x increased damage and a separate multiplier just inside of this aspect here. So it's actually a really, really big increase to your damage. It does give you damage reduction as well. So if you find a GA, you can actually add damage reduction in, which is incredibly important too. So this is a really, really good option for you as well. If you want to try capping out your resistances, you definitely can do that if you need to. We're running the grandfather for the build, Astra. It's in the guide. Okay, perfect, perfect. Yeah, so God Caspin, I actually have a video for that if you wanted to check it out. Avoid one-shots. Make sure you watch this video right here. I'm live every night. I'd love it if you stopped by, said hi, theory crafted with me. Catch you on the clip side.